Today we're going to be looking at replacing the shift boot on a 2001 Cobra when the shifter has been replaced in the car. This is a Hurst short shifter, but it could be any type of aftermarket shifter that you might be using. And what you're going to encounter is that the stock shift boot that goes on top is going to have problems with the new inner boot being so large. And what ends up occurring is what has happened here, where that this is the original stock one that has ripped. And not only that, the actual seal itself has ripped as well. The problem with that is that if you can see, this actually goes down into the outside of the car. So you're going to get exhaust fumes and smells from outside. So it's really important that you have integrity in this shift boot right here. So I've ordered a new one from Ford. It costs around $40. There's the part number right there. And I'm going to actually modify and begin cutting this so that when it goes on top of the new shifter, it's going to fit nicely around the boot that came with the stock shifter, and it's going to create that nice seal. So let's go ahead and begin. All right, so taking a look at the next step, I took a pair of scissors and cut 4 slits in the top of the replacement boot. And this allowed it to have some extra space to get around this inner boot on the Hurst shifter. Now, I will tell you that getting this outer boot into place is a bit of a chore. As you can see, I've rubbed against here. And the reason is because on the stock shifter, this inner boot is a lot smaller. So this fits in very nicely. Right now, as it stands, it's actually still hovering a little bit above. I can get those bolt holes to line up, but I actually have to put some force on it to push it down. So I think what I'm going to do, and what I want, is a nice tight seal. Instead of having these just 4 slits, because I want to take it one step at a time, I'm going to go ahead and cut these tabs off here that ended up resulting in it, because I've already got that around the shifter so that it hugs this inner boot right here. And depending on which type of shifter you have, you might need to use, you might be able to cut less off or be able to cut more off. But the idea is that we want to keep the integrity of this seal right here so that we keep exhaust fumes and other outside air from getting into the car. So it's kind of like making small cuts on an uneven chair. You want to do it a little bit at a time, because otherwise you're going to end up destroying this, and then you're going to be throwing out that money for your boot. And as I mentioned, it's about a $40 part, so you don't want to do it over and over again. So make another cut, and we're going to go ahead and do that and cut along here, and then we're going to see what that looks like and then test it again. So I went ahead and cut those tabs off just using a pair of scissors. I kept it in place. I didn't even remove it. And you can see now I've got a little bit of a better seal from the outside boot, and then just kind of tucked it under the inside boot. And right there all the way around. And this gives it a pretty nice relationship between the inner boot and the outer boot. So the next step is just to get these holes to line up, install the original factory bolts, and then make sure that the shifter still works well. Let's try it out. So started tightening down the bolts and ran into a problem that I had run into originally, which is you can see everything's flat, but we've got a problem. This is where the boot gets stretched out so much that you can see it still goes to the outside of the car, and this is exactly what we do not want. We want a good seal all the way around. So what I'm going to have to do is take this back up, and again, a little bit of trial and error, and get this boot to have a little bit more slack so that when it sits down, it's going to be able to seal properly. The other thing you can try to do is add some additional material to get that to sit under there. But what I really want is I want the original boot to be sitting under that bracket so that that's what's being pressed against the frame of the car. So I'm going to go ahead and pull this back out and make some additional modifications so that we can get it to fit properly. So it turns out that I actually didn't have to make any more cuts, and the end product was that the seal is actually a little bit nicer joined to the inner boot. So what I did is I didn't make any additional cuts, and I just forced it from the original cut down around the next ring of the inner boot from the Hurst shifter. And look how nice that looks all the way around. That looks really good. But the second and probably most important step that I did was, as you can see here, is I continually push down on this boot from the outside, keeping it under this bracket the entire time to get the screws started. Because once this seal gets inside this clip as you're tightening down, it'll make that gap like we saw previously. So you constantly have to check all around and make sure that that seal is under that bracket. And once it catches and it stays under there and you're tightening down, you're good to go for the rest. So what I recommend, you could either get 2 people to do this or you can do it yourself. Always push down on this to give that slack so that it's riding under that bracket the whole time as you tighten these 2 bolts down. And then same thing with the other side. Right now that side's not giving me any problem, but I can starting to see it buckle over here. So I'm going to pay close attention as I tighten all the bolts down to get this so that there are no gaps between the bracket and the outer boot. The other thing I recommend is probably starting with that rear left bolt, as it's a little bit trickier to get to. It's a lot easier if you take off this piece that goes around the air conditioning and the stereo. It just pops out, just like the one around the boot. It gives you a little more room for the wrench, and then tighten them evenly all the way around. So let's give it a shot and see how we do. So I've finished tightening down all the bolts, and we're going to double check the integrity of this seal at this point, making sure that everything is in order as we expect. And I'm checking, and you can see the seal is on the outside of the bracket being pressed down, and we're looking good. I actually, on this side where it began to buckle, had actually loosened it up again and pushed that seal under as much as possible. So you might have to do it a few times to get it right, but again, you want that seal all the way around. And there you have it. One other last little tip: you may want to be careful because of the seal under it. It's really difficult to get an idea of the tension on those bolts. You want it tightened down so that there's no air leaks in there, but at the same time, there's a good chance you could strip these bolts just because they're going directly into the body itself, and you've got that pushback from the foam seal, so it's not impossible to strip them, and once you do, you're going to have to probably Healy coil, so just be careful on that end. After that, put everything back together and test it. Make sure that it works well. And again, it seems like the trick on this particular shifter was to cut it a bit away, get it around that second seal. Now we've got a nice mating right there in the middle between the outer boot and the inner boot. And we've also got a seal from the outside air and fumes that would ordinarily come in the car if you didn't get a good seal. This is going to be typical on probably a lot of the aftermarket shifters that have a larger boot than what came with the stock Mustang itself. Hope this helped you out, and hit like on the video if it did. Thanks a lot and have a great day.